Yep.
Michael?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Social justice spokesman Martin Luther King Jr. noted that, quote, the moral arc of the universe bends at the elbow of justice, end quote. Years after these words were uttered, their impact still remains. In a world that is growingly increasingly progressive, we cannot deny the invaluable significance of just law. I believe that just law is worth protecting. For that reason, I stand resolved. Criminal procedure should value truth-seeking over individual privacy. Let's dive into some definitions. Definition 1, criminal procedure, deals with a set of rules governing the series of proceedings through which the government enforces substantive criminal law. Definition 2, truth-seeking. Truth-seeking is operationally defined as a collection of actions and procedures aimed at knowing the truth. Definition 3, individual privacy. Oxford Dictionary defines individual privacy as a state in which one is not observed or disturbed by other people. Now that we have confirmed what the resolution is talking about, let's decide whether or not we can know it's true or false. Well, before we start diving into some arguments and value, I want to start with a resolutional analysis. Our first resolutional analysis for today is that is of genuine truth. Genuine truth is just simply saying this, is that if we're going to be searching for the truth in the act of the resolution saying of truth-seeking, we must acknowledge the fact that truth must exist for us to be able to search truth in the first place. We're not going to be searching for something that we don't know exists. Just as a matter of fact, as Nathaniel mentioned in his last case, that if we're going to be searching for the fountain of youth, then it would be called fountain of youth seeking. If we're going to be searching for something, whether it's true or false, we'll be searching on whether or not it is true or false to the act of truth seeking. Simply enough, if it is not actually searching for the truth, then it is not truth seeking. Let's get to my value of justice. Simply, justice is operationally defined as punishing the guilty and protecting the innocent. You see, if we can see that truth-seeking actually punishes the guilty and protects the innocent more so than individual privacy does in criminal procedure, it deserves an affirmative ballot. A value link you can write as a robust measure. A robust measure. Simply, justice subsumes everything in criminal procedure. Courts, the police, security officers, lawyers, search warrants, and a plethora of other procedural items or branches. They all exist to fulfill and protect the laws of justice. To measure this resolution in its entirety, we need a compelling value. Justice subsumes all else in criminal procedure, and that is why it should be used. So my first contention 1. Prioritizing privacy hinders justice. Don't get me wrong, privacy is an essential right that we ought to protect. However, when the time is running out and justice is on the line, privacy shouldn't be prioritized over the truth. It can be used to hide criminals, destroy evidence, and even let lawbreakers go free. Application 1, Mapp versus Ohio. Mapp versus Ohio. In 1957, Cleveland police officers received a tip-off that a bombing suspect might have been at the house of Delore Mapp, an employee in illegal gambling rackets. When the police obtained a search warrant, they investigated her apartment. They found a collection of sensitive books and pictures and illicit betting sites / belongings. She was arrested and convicted of, quote, knowingly having had in her possession and under her control certain lewd and lascivious books, pictures, and photographs in the violation of 2905.34 of Ohio's revised code. In other words, what she had in her house was against the law. Mapp, however, successfully reversed her conviction when she appealed to the Supreme Court. She openly displayed her Fourth Amendment rights, arguing that the police had no probable cause for suspecting that she owned illegal and inappropriate belongings. The evidence, she said, was therefore also unlawful and unacceptable. As a result, the court ruled in favor of 6-3, in favor of Mapp. But unfortunately, you see, Mapp was let off the hook for committing a terrible crime. Just because the police didn't know that she committed it at first, pointed out later, which violated a small section of the Fourth Amendment. Is that the way that we want our criminal procedure to operate? Fundamental moral law and common sense would say no. The negative side would say yes. Now, contention 2. Prioritizing truth protects justice. Now, to be fair, there is legitimate concern in affirming this resolution. People really don't like the idea of having their privacy being violated by any means. Internet monitoring, police investigations, search warrants, these things tend to make people uncomfortable. But in the scope of this resolution, we need to remember some certain things. We need to my second application, and that is Danielle Van Dam. Danielle Van Dam. 7-year-old Danielle Van Dam was kidnapped in the dead of night by her neighbor, 49-year-old David Westerfield, in February 2002. Westerfield abducted the young girl and murdered her. Her parents were heartbroken over the disappearance, but no significant evidence pointed to any suspect. A detective on the case, based on a wild hunch, marched up to Westerfield's door and lied, telling him that all the houses were going to be investigated and that she would just like to see his. Upon this investigation, she found evidence of Danielle's abduction, accused Westerfield of the crime, and was eventually found guilty. Sometime later, Westerfield admitted to the murder. However, if police officers at Westerfield had been more concerned with individual privacy being in the way, this murderous psychopath may still be walking free today. Unfortunately, thankfully, the police officer valued the idea of seeking for truth rather than concerning over this person's individual privacy in the essence of a dangerous case. But because this police officer and many other investigators in criminal procedure value the idea of searching for the proper truth in order to solve and achieve the value of justice, is the reason why individual privacy must be mitigated at some certain situations to allow the adequate value of justice and the action of truth-seeking to be upheld. Thank you.
Everybody's ready? All right, good. All right, naturally I have a couple of questions today. First of all, can you define truth-seeking?
Truth-seeking, I operationally define as a collection of actions and procedures attempting to know truth.
Okay, great. Your resolutional analysis was genuine truth. Can you give me an example of that?
Genuine truth?
How we know if we're searching for genuine truth? Like, how do we know if something is, if we're searching for that?
So if we heard that someone was being murdered, if we heard that someone was murdered in someone's backyard, searching for the truth of whether or not that is actually true would be an act of genuine truth.
Okay, so where does this all apply at? Like, is it just murder that we know that something exists, or is it all criminal law?
Within criminal procedure.
Within all criminal procedure?
Yes.
Okay, great. Why is justice important?
Because it's the fundamental backbone of our criminal procedure.
Okay, great. Can you define justice for me real quick?
Define justice is just simply punishing the guilty and protecting the innocent.
Okay, protecting the innocent. Who defines if the innocent is protected?
If the innocent is protected? Can you please read?
Okay, what part of the innocent person are we trying to protect? All of their rights?
I believe that we're trying to protect the innocent person because they are innocent.
Okay, but what about the person? Just their life or their human rights? What are we looking to protect?
Well, we probably don't want to convict them of a crime they have not been convicted of, or they have not.
No, but I'm specifically asking, are we just protecting their life or are we also protecting all of their rights?
I believe we're protecting the person.
But I'm asking what that means. What does that look like? When you make a decision to protect a person, what are you actively protecting in that person?
I believe when you say person, you're looking at the rights, you're looking at the life.
Okay, great. Now, who determines then if you protected their rights?
Who determines?
If their rights have been protected.
Please restate the question. What do you mean by that?
Okay, who is the person making the decision of if the innocent is protected and their rights are protected?
If the innocent is protected. So if we're going based off the idea that people would be punishing, that we were punishing the guilty and protecting the innocent, and we'll go up to the highest court of the case.
The highest court, so we're going to assume the government then. Sure. Okay, great. Define truth finding.
Truth finding? Probably discovering the truth.
Discovering the truth. Great, no further questions.
I get to do my prep time, or is somebody else? It doesn't really matter to me.
Go ahead, manager. Justice Louis D. Brandeis famously wrote, "Experience should teach us to be most on our guard to protect liberty when government's purposes are beneficial." Truth-seeking is a noble goal. I'm not going to deny that. But when we throw away privacy to collect this goal, we throw away our freedom in order to have a bit more information. That danger is why I stand against the resolution. Now, first of all, I'm going to agree to all three of my opponent's definitions, but I want to jump into his resolutional analysis because he chose a resolutional analysis of genuine truth. I'm going to agree to this resolutional analysis, but I'd also like to present a point of my own. My resolutional analysis is truth-seeking versus truth-finding. Truth-seeking versus truth-finding. Nothing in the resolution or anything my opponent has brought up ever tells us that because you're seeking truth, you're necessarily going to find it. There are plenty of instances where someone can look for truth and never find it. And I think this is an important point when we're looking at this resolution as a whole. Moving on, I would like to present my own value, that of human rights. We'll be using the definition offered to us by John Locke when he said that there are three fundamental rights: life, liberty, and property. Here are two reasons to use human rights to measure the resolution. My first reason to prefer is a moral priority. A moral priority. This responds to his valuing of robust measure. Human rights must be the priority of any good government. Think of the countries that we widely consider to have failed the people. North Korea, China, and Venezuela come to mind. We don't consider them failures because they don't have booming economies, nice roads, or great education systems. Their foremost problem is their inability to protect life, liberty, and property of their citizens. When a government throws away human rights out the window, they're throwing their country out the window. My second reason to prefer is guards against tyranny. This also applies to his own value of justice. Any other framework of governance falls apart when it ignores human rights. If the government cared mostly about public safety, they'd lock everyone in a padded room where no one could ever be hurt. We know that's evil because it violates liberty. If the government mostly cared about societal welfare, they'd take away all of someone's money and give it to programs to help the homeless. We know that's wrong because it violates property rights. Every other goal of government is limited by human rights. In fact, let's take a look at what is limited by human rights. Justice. Now, I asked my opponent who defines what justice is, the fairness in protecting the innocent, how that looks like. And we came to the conclusion that it's the government. The government decides at what point we've protected the innocent. Now, from an American Western perspective, that seems like a great thing as we're infallible, right? We can always come to great decisions about how the innocent are protected and the ones that aren't innocent are punished. Unfortunately, that's not what the rest of the world looks like. When we look at the rights of the people in many other countries around the world, like examples I've already brought up of North Korea, China, and Venezuela, we see that the idea of the innocent being protected kind of takes a very different meaning. We see that justice is technically applied in those countries, and yet it doesn't have the morally high ground, while human rights is not subjective, it's objective. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and look at my first contention. Truth-seeking endangers human rights. Truth-seeking endangers human rights. Truth-seeking is fine when it is limited by an individual's right to privacy. When we remove the guardrails for that privacy, we fall off the cliff into a blatant destruction of rights. Let's look at my application, that of limitless surveillance. If the government truly cared about finding truth more than your privacy, they'd monitor everything that you said and did. The best way to truth-seek, as it were, would be to monitor every single phone call you made, text you sent, email you procured, and put wiretaps in your house, after all. Would we catch more criminals? Most likely. If we could see the text messages of drug dealers, listen to the phone calls of burglars, and read the emails of con artists, we'd most likely be able to stop them. But at what cost? The idea of constant monitoring makes us all recoil because we know that it would destroy our human rights. My second contention is that individual privacy protects human rights. Individual privacy doesn't just allow you to be free of government intrusion into your personal life, it allows our criminal justice system to function. We'll see how our criminal justice system would fall apart without privacy in my second application, that of self-incrimination. Self-incrimination. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's the implicating yourself in a crime or during criminal prosecution. Now, in the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, it's clearly stated that unless it's voluntary, we have no reason to self-incriminate ourselves. We cannot be forced, as it were, to self-incriminate ourselves during that crime. Your thoughts and words are your property. They are your property, and therefore they are a human right. And if the government attempts to forcefully tell you to self-incriminate, then they are violating your human rights. So what limits them? What limits them from taking your thoughts and making you say them, harming your human rights? Privacy. The privacy to keep your thoughts to yourself, to keep them private. Ultimately, let's take a look at his conclusions. his contentions, excuse me. His first was that prioritizing privacy hinders justice. Now, just replying to his first contention, the point is no impact. Just because you're prioritizing, privacy and that hinders a sense of justice doesn't always mean that's a bad thing. Why is that? Because justice isn't always a good thing unless it's limited by human rights. So ultimately, this has no impact because justice is not our main goal that we're trying to achieve and the way that we're limiting the resolution. But his application was that of Matt versus Ohio. And my point here is that this is a fringe case. Now, when we're looking at the idea of privacy versus truth-seeking, we have to understand something. My resolutional analysis. Truth-seeking doesn't always mean truth-finding. Just because in a single instance that he can bring up of when they did something illegal and got into a man's house to find out the truth, doesn't mean that that would work in a majority of instances. But my second response is also needed. Bad outcome. Bad outcome. If we voted that this was a good thing, in seeking the truth of this Matt versus Ohio case, that the police were allowed to go in, this detective was allowed to go in with no warrant, what would that justify for later cases? If we were saying that that was a morally just thing to determine the outcome, then there would be no limits on what the government could do if they thought, hey, this guy, he could be hiding something, let's march into his house at midnight. In fact, let's construct monthly visits to every person's house and we would limit crime. And you'd be right. And under his contention, this would be just fine. In fact, it would be good because it would help justice. His second contention was that prioritizing truth protects justice. Again, this has no impact and his application is a fringe case. Just because we see this happening in a single instance doesn't mean that it necessarily applies to the entire resolution. And to assume that it does is very limiting. But this also applies to the second response I had in the other one, bad outcome. If it was completely okay to march up into this man's house to find out evidence, then there's nothing to limit the government from doing it in later cases, except privacy. Ultimately, if you value truth-seeking, not truth-finding, but truth-seeking over privacy, then you're harming our human rights, which is the goal of any good government. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking for you.
Why would anybody working on a criminal procedure want to activate and work in truth-seeking?
What do you mean? Can you rephrase that?
Why would criminal procedure work in truth-seeking?
Oh, absolutely. Their goal is to find the truth. My point is merely that they don't always do that.
Okay, so basically, because we can never find the truth.
I didn't say we can never find the truth. I just said it doesn't always happen.
Okay, so because truth doesn't always happen, we should not be searching for the truth.
Oh, no, that's not my point. It was merely resolutional analysis that just because the resolution states that we're seeking truth doesn't mean you're going to be finding it. It wasn't saying that we shouldn't seek truth, merely that you have to understand we're not always going to find it when we do seek it.
Okay, so basically we can still seek for truth, but
absolutely. In fact, it would be a
it.
problem if our government wasn't trying to find the truth.
Okay, that's true. All right, moving on. Let's see. Why is murder bad?
Why is murder bad? Because it harms human rights.
It does hurt human rights. So why do people who commit murder get punished?
Because our government was there to protect our human rights, which means punishing people who have harmed them.
Yeah, so we need to punish people who commit murder, correct?
Absolutely, because that harmed our human rights.
Why so?
What do you mean?
Why should we punish people who commit murder?
Well, there's multiple reasons. Number one is if you look at recidivism rates, he's likely to do it again, which means he'd be harming more human rights.
Okay.
So directly, we would be protecting more human rights.
Okay, so we're solely punishing those who commit murder solely because of human rights.
Absolutely not. If you committed murder of, say, the president, then that would be a very bad thing because that would launch our economy and our entire country into a state of, like, it depends who he murdered, what the situation was. But it's not just human rights. I'm just saying that's a valid measuring stick.
Okay, so why is it a good thing that we punish people who do bad things?
A, because you could do it again, and B, because that's justice in our American society.
That's true. Okay, thank you very much. Going on to your application of self-incrimination. When does self-incrimination come into play in criminal procedure?
What do you mean? Multiple times.
Multiple times. Can you give an example?
When a police arrests someone. They're given Miranda rights, but there are instances that we can find. I don't have any off the top of my head because I didn't bring evidence up here, but I've heard of cases where people have absolutely not stated the Miranda rights and forced them to give them self-incrimination.
Okay, so when someone gets arrested.
And that's just one example of when it could happen.
Okay, that's still an example when someone gets arrested. They still have the right of, not to self-incriminate upon themselves, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That right doesn't go away.
Okay, awesome. For the application that you presented, basically, sorry, your first application, could you say that again?
My first application.
Yes.
My first application was limitless surveillance.
Okay, that's awesome. So basically, you're saying that because the NSA in this application was overviewing and looking over people.
I wasn't saying they were. I was saying that this, if we looked at a hypothetical example, there are real examples, but in my specific application, I was looking at a hypothetical of what would happen if we had that.
Okay, so it's a hypothetical example. Okay, so it has not occurred in real life.
I'm sure, as we've heard in the last debate round, and we see that does happen, NSA does do that, but I was implying if they went above and beyond what they're already doing.
Is surveillance bad?
Absolutely not. Surveillance can do great things.
Okay, so can you give me an example of one of those great things?
If somebody goes into a gas station, robs the store, and there's a security camera on, they can catch the guy that robbed the store.
Awesome, thank you very much.
Just to be said, the majority of the last round, I've already heard 2 references to the last round, and they mean nothing to me. So just be aware.
Okay.
I'm not going to take anything from it.
Well, alright, sorry to affirm it.
You're fine. You're fine.
No further prep time needed? I want Everyone's ready? Michael?
Hey, while he's speaking, could one of you open the window? It's pretty stuffy. Take it away.
Let's simply start off by addressing the value argument and address some key argumentation that my opponent mentioned in his last speech, and then some of the refutation he made in my speech. One is the value argument. He presented the value of human rights. The response is simply justice serves. If we're going to be looking within the application and the criterion of criminal procedure, we must also look at what best serves the people. Both those who are innocent must be given those things that are good, but those who have committed crimes must be given those things that are bad, must be punished, just like my opponent agreed in cross-examination. Human rights does not fulfill under that type of ideal. My second response, human rights does not serve. Human rights does not serve. Simply this, we're going to be trying to look at within criminal procedure what does best for both those that are innocent, but also serves justice against those that committed crime. Just as my opponent admitted in cross-examination, human rights does nothing except acknowledge those people that are innocent that merely have some piece of information that doesn't pertain to the round. To my opponent's value link of moral priority, my response is acknowledge. Acknowledge. Of course human rights is a moral priority. Does it really have any impact upon today's debate round? No, it really does not. But you see, it serves upon the moral. I already mentioned how it serves upon the criteria for criminal procedure and how human rights does not as well. Upon the value link of guards against tyranny, my response to this is real truth-seeking. Simply this, we're going to be talking about real truth-seeking, just like I presented in my resolutional analysis that he presented, that he actually also agreed to in today's debate round. And you also have to understand that real truth-seeking also guards against tyranny. So in all reality, this moral principle upon human rights doesn't pertain to today's debate round. Towards this application of limitless surveillance, my response to this is RA. My resolution analysis 1 presented the fact that we are talking about genuine truth-seeking. We are talking about the fact that we are searching for truth because we know that truth exists. So if we're going to be, because the application of limitless surveillance, it does not apply for today's debate round. This application doesn't pertain to what we're actually talking about. It's not real truth-seeking, it's just people having surveillance. And surveillance is actually good, as my opponent admitted. So my second response today is that surveillance is good. Surveillance is good. My opponent actually admitted in cross-examination that surveillance is a good thing, and pointed out, actually in a good example, that great things can pertain from this, from having surveillance. For the application of self-incrimination, my response to this is no impact. No impact. Just because we have the ability, just because we allow people not to self-incriminate upon themselves, doesn't acknowledge anything upon the criterion of justice within the representative. Now let's look at my opponent's case. He already agreed upon the resolution analysis and definitions. He did not respond to my value link of the idea that basically is more robust, but that is fine. Actually, yes, he did. He said basically the idea that it is courts. My response to this is courts. Upon the value link of robust, he presented basically saying this government, response to this is courts. We're talking with courts here. And courts is what is going to be deciding what is just and what is not just the government, as my opponent tries to pertain to make it sound bad. In application 1 of Mapp versus Ohio, his response is fringe case. My opponent is no impact. No impact. The reason for this, we're talking about an application where justice needed to be attained because of the act of truth-seeking. If truth-seeking was not going to be activated, if truth-seeking was not being acted upon, then this person's privacy would have come into controversy for this person who's already committing a crime in different applications. My opponent, instead of actually addressing the actual application of it, much rather just attack the actual identity of the application itself. The idea that this person was committing a crime did not even pertain to my opponent's head. The fact that this person was committing a crime and was discovered by the police was completely ignored by both the Supreme Court and my opponent, and this has yet really impacted this debate now. Application 2 of Danielle Von Don, his response was fringe case and also bad outcome. My response to this is simply warrant. Warrant. You see, the idea of consent creates an idea of a warrant. If a person gives consent, sure, you can come into my house. It's just like saying you can come into my house and plant a tree. It allows the person coming, the consent basically gives a person permissible warrant upon what they actually should proceed. Just like the police officer went up to the man and said, hey, I want to investigate your house. The man gave consent. Thus, it kind of gives an invisible warrant that allows the person to have consent upon the person doing the investigation for truth seeking. For all these reasons, I humbly urge an affirmative ballot.
Here in this last negative speech of the round, the negative rebuttal, I'm going to be going down the flow and showing you why, at the end of the day, truth-seeking should not be valued above individual privacy. Now, first of all, let's take a look at the values. He talked about the value of justice again, and came back and responded to my idea of morality, and his only response here was courts. Now, my only response here is that I don't really understand how this applies to the resolution at all. I don't know that that was very clear. It wasn't clear to me what the courts have to do with morality and how that applies, so I have no response for this. Moving on, he's talking about how that human rights does not serve while justice does serve. My response to this is universal. Universal. His whole argument is based on an American Western perspective, but that's not what we're looking at today. When we're looking at truth-seeking versus individual privacy, we're looking at a universal concept. And unfortunately, while justice does seem to do good things here in America, that's not the same for everywhere else. If we look at examples of places where justice has a much different connotation, we see that human rights aren't upheld. Now, yes, the innocent are protected under the definition of the government, the one that's deciding what that even looks like. And yes, the people that committed the crime are punished. But ultimately, we see that this application just isn't good. Justice, with this connotation, doesn't provide us with what we're actually looking at. He's trying to take a subjective goal and provide it objectively. And unfortunately, that doesn't work. Human rights, on the other hand, you can put as objective. Human rights are objective. Human rights are defined as life, liberty, and property. You can't take that and try to twist it and say, well, liberty only. No, it is life, liberty, and property. An objective goal, not a subjective one. One that you know what it looks like in every single nation around the world. Moving on, let's take a look at his contention. He talked about how my French case idea had no impact. My response is a general rule. A general rule. When we're looking at this resolution, we're looking at it from the term of which one should we value higher? How do we determine value? Whichever one we're applying in every single case? Absolutely not. Whichever one we choose a majority of the time, whichever one we value higher, and whichever one achieves human rights. So my response here is still French case. French case. Just because he provided one example of where something could happen to aid in the idea of truth-seeking doesn't mean that this is an example that we need to look at when deciding the whole idea of truth-seeking. Moving on, he responded to my bad outcome by talking about a warrant. His response to my idea of bad outcome was warrant. My response back, not an invasion of privacy. Not an invasion of privacy. You see, ultimately when we look at the idea of him inviting them into their house, you're right. At that point, it wasn't an invasion of privacy, which means this doesn't fall under the resolution. We weren't looking at truth-seeking versus privacy. If he invited them into his own home, then there was no longer an invasion of privacy happening. It wasn't truth-seeking versus privacy, rather just truth-seeking. This application is not applicable. Moving on, he responded to my contention by saying that surveillance is good. Now my response here is limited surveillance. Limited surveillance. Now yes, I will concede, when a man walks into a gas station, robs it, and they catch him on security camera, that's great. But that's limited surveillance, which wasn't what my point was talking about. My point was talking about limitless surveillance. When the government has full control to do whatever they want with your information, to take all of it and transfer it to their own. Ultimately, this is what truth-seeking, if it were valued higher, would look like. And he didn't really respond to this. His only response was that that surveillance is good. And yeah, it is, when it's limited. Unfortunately, truth-seeking wouldn't make that limitation. Privacy does. He responded to my whole idea of the first contention with his resolutional analysis of genuine truth, talking about how if there's no specific suspicion of a single person, then limitless surveillance wouldn't apply because we have no reason to survey. My response here is 6 trillion. 6 trillion. By the year 2021, $6 trillion in cybercrime is expected to have been taken from the United States citizens. Does that sound like genuine truth to me? There's truth to be found in stopping cybercrime when it comes to $6 trillion. That's very significant. And ultimately, we see that that is very applicable to today's resolution. They are searching for truth with that limitless surveillance. They are trying to stop as many people as they can. Moving on, he responded to my self-incrimination by saying no impact. And the reason for this all comes down to the value. Ultimately, he provides that justice is a better value because it's objective, when in reality, it's not objective. It is subjective. So this does have an impact. Human rights are harmed when self-incrimination in the Fifth Amendment is taken away. When you are forced to give up your private thoughts for truth-seeking. Ultimately, I'm not going to deny to all of you. Truth-seeking is an amazing thing. The goal of the government is to protect our human rights, and in many instances, truth-seeking is the way to do that. But ultimately, we see that when truth-seeking goes unlimited with no limits on it, when surveillance goes unlimited with no limits on it, when privacy is not there and value higher, we see that that is not the outcome we're looking for, and that does not uphold human rights the way that it should, the way that a government should. Since our value is human rights, I propose that privacy does that best. Thank you for your time.
It's just really hot in here. I'm just like, why is the windows not helping me out?
I think the fans are turned on.
We can't hear over here if the fans on.
What's up? Yeah?
That's quite the yawn. Didn't know if that mouth is ever going to close. I was like, the yawn is going on.
Jet lag, man.
Go for it.
I can't hear Eastern time, dude.
All right, today's debate round, we must keep and acknowledge what the resolution wants us to actually fulfill. It says criminal procedure should value truth-seeking over individual privacy. With the umbrella of criminal procedure, we must actually acknowledge what criminal procedure wants. What would best fulfill criminal procedure? We're not trying to talk an external goal. We're not trying to talk an extrinsic goal. As much and as nice as that would be, especially with my opponent's eyes, however, that is not what the resolution wants us to actually fulfill. And that is one of the reasons why justice is a better value, a better criteria, and a better viewpoint for today's resolution. Let's go to my first voting issue for today, and I'll address some arguments 100. My first voting issue is simply justice serves. Justice serves. If you want to keep one thing in mind from today's debate round, is it simply the idea of justice. The idea of punishing those that are guilty and protecting those that are innocent is the one that criminal procedure should obviously pick. Something that is just simply external to just human rights ends up giving criminal procedure more obstacles and more problems throughout their actions. And that's something that has been clearly put out in today's debate round my opponent has kind of ignored. The idea that human rights creates more obstacles and that human rights does not serve. And that is a problem for the value my opponent has presented today. Amongst the applications that both of my applications, he responded both of them, basically saying a fringe case as a general rule. I'm just going to make this simple response. Both served justice. Both of my applications served justice. There was a person who committed a crime, and this person had a sense of individual privacy. But because truth-seeking took a step above its individual privacy, justice was served to an extent that was clearly necessary. My opponent has not negated the actual idea of these applications, much less than the application use within the debate round. That is not adequate for today's debate round. Actually, we should debate in the actual use of the debate application. The application of limited surveillance, I mentioned that it was not within the resolution analysis that he agreed to and I presented, and I simply said that it should not be used in today's debate round. He just mentioned $6 trillion and that it was limited surveillance. Our response is simply RA. Again, RA, simply this. It was not within resolution analysis. We already clarified that it's not going to be used in today's debate round because it's not fulfilling the resolution analysis that he and I both agreed to. Application is not going to be used. The application of self-incrimination, he did not address this at all, so the application is dropped, no impact for today's debate round. Now, simply this. We have a value that allows us to see the resolution clearly. We also have a resolution analysis that allows us to see whether or not truth-seeking is being used correctly. He mentioned earlier in his original constructive that there's a difference between truth-seeking and truth-finding. Now, obviously, I would not respond to this because it would be a clear argument, obviously, but I just want to point this one thing out. That is very true. There's a difference between pointing out that you have found and discovered the truth and obviously searching for the truth. There's an action and then there's obviously the end of the action. However, achieving the end of the action is actually achieving the value of justice. Both the applications we presented today on the affirmative case show that justice had to be applied in order for the crime to be solved. If individual privacy was valued higher than justice, then crime would never be solved.